All right, so Rio here. It is your week 2 Learn Together. So the idea that I am attempting to do here with our Learn Togethers is kind of an extension of what Andrew is doing with his coding challenge, right? Except that I'm actually going to do something a little bit different, and let's just walk through it, and hopefully as you hear me talk about it, it'll become more clear, but I'll also kind of wrap it up at the end. So there's 2 parts to this week's work. One is I want you to write some code based on what you've learned. Like we've been through at this point section 3, and I know section 3 feels really long, and there's it's not that there's a huge amount of coding, but there's a huge amount of concepts, and these are such important concepts. So the more we can give you time to practice what you've learned, the more likely you're going to integrate that so that when we move on, you'll have some of these basics, okay? So what I want you to do for the first part, which is worth 75 points this week, is I've given you a link to the stimulus check. So at this point, we're in January of spring 2021. The stimulus check rollout happened very recently. But there was some, there was a break of if you earn this much and had kids and all these different conditions, logic, Boolean, right? Conditions that determine how much your check was going to be. Okay, so I've given you a link here to this website. Okay, and what's great is there's also a calculator so you can figure out once you write some code, right, if your code is outputting the right number. And I was just playing around with it myself to actually check my own code, okay? So a couple things here. We're actually going to be coding, and I'm going to bring up my editor. I'm actually not going to show you my code, and you'll understand why in a minute. And this is, I'm going to roll this up because this is my private, and we do that for our code together, and for our on our Learn Together, this is public. So meaning anyone can see it. So I've written the code already, and it's right here. So I just want you to know, so it goes under a directory called W2, and W2 week 2. W2 might be related to stimulus, kind of an interesting, I didn't plan that. And then called the file stimulus.js, and then run it and make sure you get the right output, okay? And then do your git version control. And then once you're done, okay, and here's the difference. So there's a difference in the way you're going to submit it. What you're going to do here is in your reply, you're going to give us a link to your file. Now this is different than what we did with the code long, where you gave me a link to your commit history. You're going to give me the file. Now, I actually haven't pushed my file, but I just want to give you the idea. So CIT95, remembering, right, that looks like we already have some in there. That's great. And by the way, if you can't, as we get into this, you'll actually see quite a few more. This is 95. Sorry, you guys are 93. No wonder that didn't look right. Here we go. So here's my public, right? So again, the idea that we all can see each other's work, and because I haven't pushed my code, you won't see it. But once you do push your code W2, you click into that directory, then you grab that URL, okay? And then in your reply, you'll have first a link to your code, and then the second part, which I will cover in a minute. Okay, so let me just come back to you for a second here. So the idea here is I want you to attempt this code without going out, really only looking at what you learned in section 3, okay? You have everything in section 3 to code this example up. And it's really okay to struggle a little bit here. Honestly, it's kind of part of the gig. those who have more programming experience and understand the variables, setting up variables are fairly straightforward. Like it really depends on what kind of data you're placing in there, but the syntax of using it, I think really more challenging on the if statements and understanding the flow of it. Actually, when I wrote mine, I had to kind of realize I had done my greater than signs wrong, right? So, and that's an area that, I just want you to attempt this. So it's asking you to stretch a little bit, right? So here's the deal. You won't be able to see anybody else's reply until you hit reply here and you're ready to post your code. Now, if you really spend time and you're like, I've got some code, but I can't quite get the output, you can still hit reply and you can post that first time through. You could just post, I'm actually doing this to see examples, but don't do that until you give yourself enough time. I'm really attempting here to create a culture, because in developing this skill of programming coding, there's so many places on the web you can find code examples. And it's almost too easy, but it's also a good thing because you can see how other people write code. But what you really want to do is be able to have somebody present, or you create, that's actually going to be the next part of this, or you come up with a concept, but a code that outputs a particular specified output based on a requirement. Again, that requirement may be your own, that we will do in part 2, or one I've given you, okay? So my point here is that I want you to understand that I don't want you to spend a lot of time here, but I want you to spend enough time for you to know how well you're translating these concepts. And that's where I encourage you to come to office hours and have these conversations with me, because it helps us both understand where maybe some holes and concepts need to be done, or just more work, or because everybody comes at this at a different level. You got that? So just to be clear, you look at the website that I've given you, you attempt to write code that outputs that information based on those variables, right? Of filing status, adjusted income, and number of kids. And you're going to push that to your public repo that everyone can see. And what I want you to do in your reply is talk about if you were able to accomplish this without looking at code. If you did look at code, just say it. It's really okay. This is one of those things that I think as students, because we have so trained you not to think this way, but it's like, just be honest if you needed some help and you had to look at somebody else's code example. Now, here's the other thing, is if you look at somebody else's code example, don't use their code. Just use that as a way to help yourself understand how to approach the problem. Write your own code. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if you miss that step, if you kind of jump over that step and think, well, I'm just going to look at somebody else's, it's not going to help you. And when I see you do it, it's not going to help you, because I'll go, hey, that's not the intent. The intent is for you to write your own code. So I'm actually doing something pretty layered here, but in basic, it's I hope pretty straightforward. Take the problem I'm asking, stimulus checks, write code that accomplishes out creating that output. If you need help, you're welcome to either. By the way, the other way you could do this is reach out to Discord, right? Our group on Discord, and ask some great questions, right? Or any question is a great question, honestly, at this point. And then, if you need help looking at somebody else's example, I'm not providing my example here, because in the reply, I'm going to write, I'm going to give you the link to my example. So anyway, I hope you understand that. And you can also just ask questions about this process, because this process you're going to see again and again in this class. Okay, so that's part 1. Part 2 is that the reason I'm doing this, and you will see as we move through the course, is really, and there's 3 times this semester that you will be given the task, and I'll give you a set of requirements. I think probably next week I'll show you some of the output that I wrote for last semester, so you can see examples. And some of it, I almost don't want to show examples because it'd be like, well, we're not there yet. I don't understand the concepts. But just know that 3 times during this semester, and it's 50% of your grade, you're going to be given a set of, create code that meets these requirements. Now, it's not going to be as specific as this because I want you to come up with the concepts. And this is where I see students sometimes struggle because they're like, well, what do I want to create, or how do I approach that? And here's where I suggest you think about this, is that think about things that get attention in your life, like things that are important to you that you either keep track of, you pay attention to, or the other way you can do this is it may be apps that you use. And how you could take those concepts and create very simplified, much more simplified examples of just getting input, processing that input, and creating output. I mean, that's the same thing we're doing with the stimulus check one, right? I'm getting some input, I'm writing code that does some logical operations and then creates output, okay? So, but I want you to start thinking about that. And so for this second part, which is take some time to think about this, right? And write about it. Like for me right now, there's a couple of things that are probably up for me more than anything. One is the amount of calories I'm burning during my workouts, or the amount of energy it takes for me to charge my electric car. These are, right, very important things. So I could see writing some code for that. And so those may be the focus of what I write this semester. Like last semester, I did rock, scissors, paper, and I've done that a couple times. So I'm like, I'm going to do something new this semester because I think it's good that we're constantly challenging ourselves to kind of take, again, this idea of here's an idea, how do I write code that accomplishes this? And often we start with an idea and we have to kind of go, okay, based on what I'm learning, what part of that can I write, or how can I maybe make it simpler? So just know the point of the second part is just to give that some thought. Like, what are the things that you're interested in that you might want to create an app for, right? Or what apps are you interested in that you might want to do something like that? So, okay. So I know that's a lot. This is your first learn together for this class. Do know that there'll be 2 things in your reply. There'll be a link to your code, and then a little discussion about, if you had to look at somebody else's code, or if you needed help, or whatever it was your approach. So, and then another one, and you could use these, I actually use headings here. So like one thing you could do is, right, now you don't have to, I'm not going to get real, right, my code. You could actually do this, where you do a heading, right? And then you could do a link, right? And a link is just here, right? And then in here, let's go see it. It looks like they may have moved it. So, here we go. Link right here. And then a link to that. Okay, that's one. And then you would do another one that says, my ideas. Or again, name these whatever you want. By the way, that didn't look like it came out heading 3. Okay, looks like the heading 4 is at least on my resolution. And then this is where you do a little more writing. Now I want you to do some up in here too, just to kind of give a brief, like any challenges, your approaches, whatever. And then here's the last thing, is that once you do this, if you're the first person to do this, good for you. Okay, by the time you come in here, most likely I will have posted mine. And then, right, if it hasn't, you're the first person out there, and then come back later and maybe look at somebody else's code. But you do need to do 2 replies. And I want these to be substantive replies, meaning, look at their code or look at their ideas and reply in some way, because this is where we really start to interact, right? You start to feel like you're learning by reading other people's code is a great way to learn. It's the way I learn too, right? Because I look at how somebody else approached the problem, right? And then I get a better idea of the approach, right? So there's just so many benefits to look. So the more posts you can look at it, you may not, you only have to reply to two, but looking at the different approaches people take is great examples. Okay, I know, a little long. Anyway, I'm recording this before the start of the semester to give those who have already come into the class and gotten started a little early something else to work on. And I always try to keep at minimum 2 weeks of work for you to work on current stuff or go a little forward. All right. Talk to you later.